I woke up to the sound of metal striking earth, not the soft rhythmic kind that comes from wind chimes or distant construction, but the violent, deliberate thud of a sledgehammer, over and over again, echoing through the trees like a warning, and before my mind fully caught up with my body, I was already at the window, staring down the slope of my land in rural Cedar Hollow Ridge, Oregon, watching a woman swing that hammer into the wooden fence I had installed only days earlier, her face red, her movements frantic, her voice cutting through the morning air as she screamed that I had no right to block her trail. That was the moment I knew this was not going to be a civil disagreement. The woman was Lorraine Whitcomb, the longtime president of the Cedar Hollow Ridge Homeowners Association, a figure who had ruled this community for nearly 15 years through a combination of volume, intimidation, and carefully cultivated loyalty, someone people described with nervous laughter and lowered voices, the kind of person who never asked permission because she believed her presence alone was authority. She stood there on my private land, destroying my fence, rallying a small group of neighbors behind her like an audience, shouting about tradition, about community heritage, about how I was disrespecting a trail that everyone had always used. And as I watched her from a distance, still barefoot, coffee untouched, I felt the first flicker of something darker than anger. Because no one reacts that violently unless they believe something far more important than convenience is being threatened. The question that settled in my chest that morning was simple and terrifying. Was this trail actually a shared community right? Or was it just a long-standing habit of trespass that no one had ever challenged? And more importantly, why was Lorraine Whitcomb so desperate to keep it that way? I had bought those 5 acres with every dollar I had saved over a decade of careful work. Moving to Oregon not because I wanted isolation, but because I wanted responsibility. I am a landscape engineer, trained in ecological systems, erosion control, and native plant restoration, and when I first walked this property, I knew immediately it was fragile, rare, and quietly valuable in ways most people never notice. A narrow creek cut through the lower end of the land, supporting native sedges, wildflowers, and a small stand of plants listed as regionally sensitive, species that cannot survive repeated foot traffic, compaction, or litter. And yet when I moved in, I found trash in the water, crushed stems along the bank, and a visible erosion line carved by years of people walking straight through as if the land belonged to whoever arrived loudest. At first, I assumed it was ignorance, not malice, so I did what I believed in. I talked. I approached Lorraine calmly the first time, explained the ecological damage, showed her maps, soil data, and restoration plans, and asked politely that she redirect foot traffic until I could establish a protective barrier. And she smiled at me in a way that felt rehearsed, then told me, without hesitation, that the trail was community heritage, that the HOA would handle me if I tried to interfere, and that I should be careful about making enemies in a place where I was new. That was the first warning. The second came when she swung the hammer. Once the fence was down and the spectacle had been made, Lorraine Whitcomb shifted tactics. Because people like her never rely on just one weapon. They escalate, adapt, and attack from angles designed to exhaust rather than confront. And within days my name was circulating through local Facebook groups alongside carefully framed photos and captions accusing me of blocking nature, destroying a beloved community trail, and privatizing what belongs to everyone. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so effective. Hand-painted no trespassing signs I installed legally were vandalized overnight, smeared with mud and slurs, and every time I replaced them, someone filmed it, edited it, and reposted it with commentary portraying me as unstable, selfish, or greedy, while Lorraine herself led groups across my land, narrating the damage as if she were hosting a tour, turning destruction into theater. At the next HOA meeting, the room felt less like a board gathering and more like a courtroom with a pre-written verdict. Lorraine spoke passionately about legacy and access, about how trails predated deeds, about how people like me didn't understand community. And when I calmly presented surveys, title records, and state land use statutes confirming my ownership and rights, she dismissed them as technicalities. That was when Walter Haynes, an older board member who had lived there longer than anyone, stood up and quietly reminded the room that Lorraine herself had overseen the clear-cutting of a nearby wooded parcel years earlier to increase property values, a fact she never mentioned when claiming to be a guardian of nature. And for a brief moment, The room shifted, just slightly. Enough for me to realize that truth still had allies if you gave it time. The fines began shortly after, petty but constant. $500 here, $250 there, citations for visual obstruction and community disruption. And that was when I stopped trying to win an argument and started building a record. I constructed the fence again, this time reinforced and fully compliant with county regulations. And when Lorraine called a local television station to paint herself as a defender of public access, I responded not with shouting, but with documentation. I live-streamed. I walked the creek bank with my phone, showing the crushed plants, the trash, the erosion, explaining calmly, professionally, what repeated foot traffic does to a riparian system. And the video spread faster than any HOA email ever could, because facts, when delivered clearly, have a way of cutting through manufactured outrage. Allies appeared where I least expected them. Clara and Gwen, a neighbor who had stayed silent out of fear, reached out with photos documenting years of damage. The Oregon Native Plant Conservancy contacted me offering support, and suddenly the narrative began to shift from neighborhood dispute to private land conservation. That shift terrified Lorraine. Her response was not reflection, but desperation. A cease and desist letter arrived from a law firm claiming to represent the HOA, riddled with errors and misstatements. And then one night, well past midnight, my motion-activated cameras recorded someone slipping onto the property, installing a sign declaring the area a rare species zone, a move clearly designed to frame me for violating environmental regulations. The footage showed Dylan Whitcomb, Lorraine's adult son, acting nervously, checking his phone, glancing around, and when I brought the evidence to a county environmental inspector, the response was immediate and decisive. The sign was fake, the placement illegal, and the attempt to manufacture a violation was documented. Then Walter dug deeper. He uncovered archived land records showing the trail had originally been a logging access route abandoned decades ago. And more damning still, in Lorraine's own divorce filings, she had personally signed away any claim to easements or access across private parcels, including mine. The myth collapsed under its own weight. The final HOA meeting felt different the moment I walked in, quieter, heavier, as if everyone sensed that whatever happened next would change the community permanently. And Lorraine Whitcomb, sensing her grip slipping, came armed with what she believed would be her final weapon, a stack of documents she claimed proved a legal easement across my land. She held them up like scripture, citing sections loudly, confidently, until another board member, Janet Morales, took the papers, read them carefully, and realized the signatures were copied, the formatting inconsistent, and the county stamps forged. That was the crack. Moments later, Dylan posted a video online, clearly shaken, admitting that his mother had pressured him to plant signs, fabricate evidence, and intimidate neighbors. And as the video circulated in real time, people in the room began checking their phones, whispering, and finally speaking. Stories poured out. Threats. Fines used as leverage. People pushed to sell. Voices that had been silent for years finally rising. The vote was swift and overwhelming, 76-11, stripping Lorraine Whitcomb of her authority, removing her from the board, and authorizing the transfer of evidence to county officials for further action. 6 months later, the land was officially designated a protected conservation zone. The trail legally redirected along a sustainable route, and the creek began to recover, plants returning slowly, stubbornly, like trust. Lorraine sold her house and left the community without farewell. Dylan moved away, free from her control for the first time. As for me, I stand on my land now in the mornings, listening not to hammers or shouting but to water and birds, knowing that nature doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to those willing to protect it, and that sometimes peace only comes after you are brave enough to build a fence. So I'll leave you with this question. When tradition is built on trespass and authority thrives on silence, do you choose legal restraint, or do you choose Wyoming-style justice wrapped in truth and community action? And if you enjoyed stories like this, stories rooted in real conflict, real consequences, and real justice, don't forget to subscribe to LULU Stories, where we share more true, intense, and justice-driven stories like this every single week.